Hello, Steve from YOUvolution Learning, and welcome to this video on Practice Assessment 2 for Bookkeeping Transactions, and we're going to take a look at Task 7. Okay, so as we can see, Task 7 in the Bookkeeping Transactions exam is the joint worst performing task in the exam, along with Task 10. So be sure to check out the video on Task 10 as well. Now, Task 7 is a tricky area. The last examiner's report demonstrates that 70% of students will pass this and 30% of students, unfortunately, will fail. As we can see, this is where we seem to have those where students are struggling. Now, in order for us to get you from below requirement and significantly below, in order to get you here to MAAT, we're probably looking at around about 6 marks, which is around about 50% of the marks available for you in this task, because I think it's a 12-mark task. So let's take a look at other advice that the examiner has provided to us. So they let us know that this is covering learning outcome 5, which is process transactions through the ledgers to the trial balance. And they also say there are some strengths that these students are demonstrating in this task. First one being identify an amount in the trade receivables column that must be recorded in the sales ledger control account, and likewise with the payables column and being recorded in the purchase ledger control account. So those are the areas where students are finding this to be easier. But there are other areas where students are finding it to be difficult. The examiner lets us know we've got the reversal of entries, particularly VAT. That's when we come to post the other side of the VAT column into the VAT account. We've also got incorrectly transferring the amount of cash purchases or cash sales from the cash book to the cash account, and also transferring the amount in the bank column to the general ledger when the cash book is part of the double entry bookkeeping system. And what that means is if the cash book is part of the double entry bookkeeping system, then we don't need to do the cash column or the bank column. And I'll show you that, and I'll break that down for you in this video. Now, the examiner also provides us some really useful hints and tips as well. So we've got the first one saying students should recognize that if amounts appear in the debit side of the cash book or petty cash book, the entry in the general ledger must be on the opposite side. So if we've already debited the cash book or petty cash book, then we need to credit somewhere else. Likewise, if we've already credited the cash book or the petty cash book, then we need to debit another account. So remember that dual effect on our transactions. The examiner also says that students should bear in mind that unless the assessment instructions state otherwise, the cash book is considered part of the double entry bookkeeping system, and therefore no entry in respect of the amount shown in the bank column needs to be transferred to the general ledger. And that's the same principle for petty cash as well. Now, if the petty cash question, as we'll see in this one, does not say that it's not part of the double entry bookkeeping system, then we need to make the assumption that it is. And the final bit of advice that the examiner gives to us is students are advised to spend more time on this task to review the task instructions and the responses that you're giving as well. Students spent the least amount of time in this task and may have overlooked some of the key points that may have had an effect on their responses. That's quite a big bit of advice that the examiner is saying, and a bit of enlightenment really, to say this is what is along with task 10, this is the worst performing task in this exam, but students are spending the least amount of time on this task. So when you're preparing for this task, take note of what the examiner is saying, especially making sure you are reading the instructions. You understand whether the cash book or the petty cash book is part of the double entry bookkeeping system or not, and making sure that if we are debiting the cash book or petty cash, we're going to credit somewhere else, and likewise if we're crediting the cash book or petty cash book, therefore we need to debit the other accounts. So let's take a look at practice assessment 2 then for task 7. So as you can see here, this is looking at learning outcome 5.1, which is transfer data from the books of prime entry to the ledgers. So let's take a look at what the task is asking. It says there are totals these are the totals of the petty cash book at the end of the month. And you can see we've got the petty cash book. I'll just grab my highlighter. We can see we've got the petty cash book here. And you can see this is kind of broken down into a T account where we've got our debit side and our credit side. So it says, here's the petty cash book. We've got it. You can see we've got the total on the debit side, which is 225, and then the totals on the credit side are 225. So because the task doesn't say otherwise, just a reminder what the examiner says, that we should bear in mind that unless the task tells us otherwise, we assume that this is part of the double entry bookkeeping system. Then what that means is this amount here, these amounts that we've got here and here, we don't need to do anything with those because this is part of the double entry bookkeeping system. So we've already debited the petty cash book with our totals and credited our petty cash book with our totals. So we don't need to do anything with those when we come to complete the double entry bookkeeping. So the question is, what will be the entries in the general ledger? Now you can see we've got 4 boxes, so 4 account names, and on the drop down you can see here that we've got bank, charitable donations, posted expenses, printing expenses, purchase ledger control account, and sales ledger control account as well. So that's given us a bit of a clue as to what the account names need to be. Now when we're posting from a petty cash book, for example, it makes it really straightforward for us because in effect it tells us the account names that we need to post to. Now in this one, because it hasn't told us that the petty cash book is not part of the double entry bookkeeping system, we don't need to worry about those 2 columns. We don't need to worry about the debit total of 225 or the credit total of 225. The only thing that we need to be careful of, or the only thing we need to be posting here, are what I would call the information columns. So where it breaks down what's been spent through petty cash into its different columns. So in this question, we've got columns for VAT, printing expenses, postage expenses, and charitable donations. So there are accounts. So we're going to write those into where it says account name. So we'll start with the first one, which is VAT. So account name would just be VAT. Obviously in the exam, you choose it from the drop down. As you can see, we've got the drop down figure there. We've got the drop down information account. We've got the drop down account name there. Then we've got printing expenses. And then we've got postage expenses. And then we've got charitable donations as well. Now each of those accounts are within the drop down list for the account names, but they're also the same as the headers on the question as well. So that's the first 4 marks from this question. Now we need 12 marks to pass because this question is worth 12 marks. We've got 4 marks already there. We've not really had to do anything. We've just copied down the information that's been given to us. Excellent. So now the next thing to do is enter the amounts. So the VAT amount that it tells us is £23. So we're just going to write in £23. And then printing expenses, the amount is £115. So again, in the amount column of the question, we're going to write in £115. Posted expenses, there for £18. So we're going to enter £18 in the amount box as well. And then charitable donations, it tells us that it's £25. And again, we're just going to write £25 in there. Now, in order for you to pass this task, 70% is 9 marks. Without doing any accounting, we've just copied information down. We've already gained 8 marks. That puts us on that borderline bracket for this task. So now we only really need to get 1 more mark from this. And I'm going to show you how to get all the marks really straightforward. Now, in the petty cash information that it gives us, the VAT, printing expenses, posting expenses, and charitable donations, they're all showing on the credit side of the petty cash book. That means that the amount of those transactions has already been posted to the credit side of the cash book. So that means when we come to post those amounts to their respective accounts, so the VAT account, the printing expenses, postage expenses, and charitable donations, we're going to debit each of those accounts. that's how we get the full marks on the question like this, because we've understood that the credit side of the petty cash book has already been done. We don't need to worry about that. Now we're just going to post those individual amounts, as we've said, to the debit side of each of those accounts. And I'll also show you another way that you can check that that's right as well. So I'm just going to tick debit for each of these. And that's given us the full 12 marks for this. That's exceeded in this task, by the way. Now, another way that we can help is kind of a cheat, really. Another way we can help ourselves here is think of printing expenses and posted expenses, and think about what you've learned so far in learning bookkeeping transactions. An expense account, when you think of something like dead click, so we've got DEAD and then CLIC. We've got dead is for debit, expenses, assets and drawings, and click is credit, liabilities, income and capital. So we know we need to debit expenses. So every time we create a new expense, we're going to debit the expense account. So when we've used petty cash to pay for printing expenses or posted expenses, then we're creating a new expense. So that means we know when we create a new expense, we need to debit the expense accounts. As you can see, what we've done on this question is when we've credited the petty cash book, we then created new expenses in those respective expense accounts, which are all debits. Really straightforward to think of it that way. So make sure that you are using that information to help you to clarify what you've done. So for example, if you're getting mixed up and you think, well, these are petty cash transactions, they're being credited to petty cash, therefore I need to credit each of these accounts, use that knowledge of dead click and say, well, I'm creating new expenses. So therefore, if I'm creating a new expense, that's got to be a debit transaction. I just tick credit. That can't be right. That doesn't follow that logic. So therefore, it gives you the opportunity to correct any errors that you may have made. Okay, so that's this task. And like I said, each mark within this is probably worth 1 mark each. And as I said, 8 marks of this task are literally given to you from the information. The account names are all there on the headers. The values are all there as well. That gives you 8 marks. You only need to get them 1 extra one right. And if you're struggling to think, oh, well, where would VAT go, or where would charitable donations go? Don't worry too much about those, because you've got 2 others that tell you printing expenses and postage expenses. And then using what we talked about in terms of dead click and understanding we're creating a new expense, that can give you those extra 2 marks. That'll give you 10 marks. That puts you in at least the MEAT bracket for this task. Okay, so let's just wrap up what the examiner has told us. Like we said, this was all about learning outcome 5, which is processing transactions through the ledgers to the trial balance. But in particular, this task is covering learning outcome 5.1, which is transferring data from the day books, from the books of prime entry to the ledgers. So we've seen, if you've seen the video on practice assessment 1, we looked at the cash book there, and in this video we looked at the petty cash book. So there are 2 of the books of prime entry that we're likely to come across in task 7. So make sure you've watched both of these videos, and then you're putting what you've covered into practice in your practice questions that your providers have given to you. Okay, that's the end of this video. And I'd like to say thank you very much. Be sure to join us for more videos in the future, and good luck with your studies. I'm Steve, YOUvolution Learning, and I'll see you soon.